Shout outs to Lampy for the graphic, the 3v3 YCS top 16 breakdown, which obviously consists of 48 decks because it's a 3v3 tournament. We had 22 Fire King decks, 18 Pure Snake Eye, 5 Voiceless Voice, 1 Pearly, 1 Flu, 1 Rescue Ace. So 40 out of 48 are Snake Eye decks. 41 even, because Rescue Ace is probably also Snake Eyes. I think at this point in time, you have no other choice but calling that tier 0. A lot of people look at it from a perspective of, if it's tier 0, that means it's bad. How is it not bad? I don't understand what you care about though. That's the problem. Just listen to my perspective first and think about it. Do me that favor. The game of Yu-Gi-Oh offers like a lot of different ways how you can enjoy it, and what you care about and what makes a format good for you is very individual. For example, it's not the only thing I care about, but what I care about the most is, from a competitive perspective, does the better player have a better chance of winning than a worse player, right? I want the better player to win as often as possible. Not 100% of the time, but like the closer a game of Yu-Gi-Oh is to a 50-50, no matter how good the players are, the worse a format is for me personally. I care about skill being a deciding factor in the game. That can be in deck building, in the actual game, in side decking patterns, in all that kind of stuff. All those skill sets, I want to matter them as much as possible. I want the format to be very skill intensive, basically, because I consider myself a good player and I want to be able to beat players that are worse than me, and I don't want to rely on luck to do that, right? And there's a lot of other factors that matter for other people. Like, for example, accessibility is an issue that some people have with the current format, and that is valid. That's 100% valid to not like the current format because you don't have access to the card. That is one issue, right? Another issue is some people really like diversity in formats, right? It is not something that I personally care about that much, right? But some people do, and that's legit, right? The point I'm trying to get across is that if you mainly care about good Yu-Gi-Oh games, whether a format has 1 deck or 20 decks is not always a decisive factor. In some formats, it can even be worse if it is super diverse because it gets harder to prepare for. The more decks are in a format, the less predictable it is for a good player and predict on what you're going to play against, right? Which is a commonly mentioned problem in super diverse formats that some pro players have. They get frustrated because they can't prepare for 20 different decks, right? That is something that some people really enjoy because they have a lot of options and they have very diverse tournament runs, a very diverse tournament experience. You know, you get a lot of different opponents, different decks, and all that kind of stuff. For some people that matters and it's good, and for some people it's bad, right? And I think the most important takeaway from this entire thing is that the game of Yu-Gi-Oh is super subjective in how you enjoy it, right? Different people enjoy it in very different ways, meaning that only because you think diversity is the most important factor in determining whether a format is good or bad, that does not mean that's correct. Like, there is no right or wrong in this whole discourse, right? A format that is super diverse can be very cool to one person and very bad to another person, right? And so tier 0 formats, I personally think, are not per default like bad. I don't agree with the take that like tier 0 means bad. I think that is simply not the case. As with most things in life, tier 0 formats have pros and cons. One con is that you don't have a lot of choices in what you play. Another con is that tier 0 formats tend to be relatively expensive, because if there's only 1 deck available, then those cards are usually very sought after, which usually makes them expensive. There's exceptions of tier 0 formats where the tier 0 deck is not actually that expensive, but usually it ends up being like that, right? Which is a downside. I'll say that. I'm not trying to defend the price point of the current decks, right? Another thing is that like the gameplay can be relatively repetitive. And another negative of a tier 0 format is that the quality of the tier 0 format is 100% dependent on how good is the mirror match of the top deck. If the top deck in the format has a very enjoyable mirror match, then it usually ends up being a good format in my eyes. If the top deck in a format has a bad mirror match, like I'm looking at Goki mirrors or Spiral mirrors, then it's usually a pretty awful format. By the way, so far, most of this is unrelated to the current format. I'm not saying the Snake Eye mirror is good or bad yet. We haven't entered that discussion yet. I'm talking about tier 0 in general at the moment. We'll get to that. I think whether a tier 0 format is good or bad, ultimately, for me personally, it depends on the tier 0 deck. Because if the tier 0 mirror match is good, then I don't don't actually mind having to play a bunch of them in a tournament. I am not the kind of person, if I play 10 rounds of Swiss, I want to play against a lot of different decks to make sure I have like a diverse day, a diverse experience. It's not what I'm looking for. As a competitive player, I look for something I can prepare for. And even diverse formats can be good. If a lot of the decks in a diverse format are like cool and interactive and all that, then it can still be a very good diverse format. I'm just saying the number of available decks is not necessarily a measurement for quality in a format, rather. My conclusion in general on tier 0 formats is the following. I think tier 0 formats can be fine for me personally. However, I think that they have a set of disadvantages that are not something you can deny. I know and I acknowledge that I am probably in the minority when I say I don't care that much for diversity. I think the majority of the Yu-Gi-Oh community cares about that. The majority of the community doesn't like when they only have one option or two options, right? People want a choice. For that reason, I think it's not very good for the game overall if a tier 0 format lasts too long. Whether it's a good tier 0 format or a bad tier 0 format, I think it's always better if tier 0 doesn't last half a year or a year or whatever like that, right? Because obviously I care about my personal perception, like what I like in a format and what I dislike in a format, but I care way more for the health of the game in general, right? And if there's something that I personally like, but it's not good for the health of the game overall, then I prefer for it to not last that long. So with that, I think that tier 0 formats, they have their advantages. Like for example, if there's only one or two decks, then it's much easier to prepare for a tournament, which in return makes preparation more important, meaning that people that prepare well and play well are usually rewarded, right? Which I think is good. However, I don't want tier 0 formats to last super long. My main point essentially, and something that I always want to get out there, is that Yu-Gi-Oh is an incredibly large community. The game has so many different aspects and so many different people play this game and enjoy it in so many different ways. So all I'm asking, I know it's a tough ask from the Yu-Gi-Oh community, is to just try to put yourselves into maybe the position of others, which I know is something that in general humanity nowadays is not very good at. But like for the most part, your own personal perception of something is not always the same for everyone in the community. So like you don't have to hate on someone for enjoying the current format. You also don't have to hate on someone for disliking the current format. It is just a matter of people enjoy this game in different ways. And I think it's okay to let people have that for a while. It always seems like people are way more willing to spread negativity rather than just letting someone else maybe have their time, right? Maybe there's one format where it's super diverse and I can sit there and be like, I don't like that, but I can let people have their time. I acknowledge that other people enjoy this time in the game, and I don't know what's so hard about just letting others have their fun. I don't know. Unless you're playing Mathmic, that's the only exception to this rule. That being said, let's take a little turn towards the current format. Snake Eye Fire King, Snake Eye format. Is it a good format or is it a bad format? And once again, following this discussion, I will no longer accept the take of the deck is dominant, therefore the format is bad. Okay, that is a take that we're going to eliminate from this discussion because it's not a good take. Snake Eyes, I think, is putting us in a weird position at the moment, because I think there are some aspects about Snake Eye that are really cool, and I think there are also some that I'm really worried about. It's a very interactive deck, which for me personally is a good thing. I saw it. We casted the Master Duel Invitational past weekend, right? And there was a decent amount of Snake Eye mirrors, and I'm not gonna lie, between all of the games in that Invitational, the Snake Eye mirror matches were by far the best Yu-Gi-Oh in that tournament. The most interactive, the most fun to watch, probably the most fun to play. The Snake Eye mirror matches there were actually really, really cool. The problem, essentially, what I'm trying to get to is that the Snake Eye mirror matches are only fun and interactive if people actually get to play the game. And the way people are currently building their Snake Eye decks with the maximum amount of ways to stop the opponent from playing. It's 3 Ash, 3 Droll, 3 Effect Veiler. Mourner has made its way into the main decks. Nibiru, Imperm, like how many hand traps is that? 3, 6, 9, 11, 14, 17. 9 more in the side deck. This is 26 hand traps between main and side. Because no matter how interactive the engine is, the deck is weak to hand traps, and that's annoying. I think that the gameplay where someone goes normal summon Snake Eye Ash, gets impermed, then summons Diabellstar, gets ashed on the spell card, and then passes the turn. It's just a mini game of who gets to play the game first, and whoever plays the game first wins the game. At the moment, it seems like that is what people are gravitating towards. If that is how it's going to be until the end of the format, then I think it's not going to be a good format. I'm not going to like it. Not because it's a tier 0 format, not because Snake Eye is so oppressive, but because if everyone is playing 18 to 21 hand traps, there's just not a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh being played. Now, I don't think that it is already the time to make the final call on this, right? Because the format has still just started. I think there is still some room for experimentation. I have ideas, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. There is no other way to play. No, I don't agree. And I think that's going to be the difference usually. And I think that's why you guys don't like tier 0 formats, is because you might not even see the possibilities here, right? Because I'm not going to lie, this is the most hyped I have ever been to play in a big event since a year or something like that. The amount of ideas I have on how you could solve this format and how you could approach it differently to maybe find a solution to this sort of thing, it's so much more than in most of the past years that I've like ever had the hype to play in a tournament. It's so narrow-minded, I feel like. There's nothing else I would like to do more than to hop into tournaments and try different approaches to this, to like punish people for putting 18 hand traps into their main deck and just like all that kind of stuff. You guys know how much I hate flying for like environmental reasons. I'm this close to like traveling to an American YCS in this format. I don't know if I'm gonna do it yet because I really don't want to, but like we haven't had a YCS since December and we're not gonna get one until like a couple months from now. I'm down bad. I'm not sure if I'm gonna do it yet. I'm just saying this to showcase what is frustrating for some people is really motivating for others. And I'm not capping when I say this is the most motivated I've been in a long time to try stuff. And I think that alone should maybe showcase that there are different perspectives on Yu-Gi-Oh formats. That's what I wanted to say about this format. I hope it presents a different perspective rather than just deck strong bad. I just want to showcase how narrow-minded that is. I've come to terms with the fact that the Yu-Gi-Oh community is like this because humanity is like this a lot of the times, unfortunately. The one thing about this format that I will not defend, that I do think is pretty bad, is its price point. That is a genuine issue that I 100% agree on. I think the deck is too expensive, and I think that hurts. Do you think a tier 0 format would be the best time to get into learning Yu-Gi-Oh ignoring the prices? It's not an easy question to answer because being good at Yu-Gi-Oh involves a lot of different skill sets. Starting to play Yu-Gi-Oh in a tier 0 format would be really good at teaching you some skill sets and really bad at teaching you others. Like, for example, it would be easier to start playing in a tier 0 format because there is quite simply less information to process. When you start playing Yu-Gi-Oh and there's 20 different decks and all of them are viable, going into a tournament, I feel like would be very, very overwhelming. I think one of the most frustrating things when you start playing Yu-Gi-Oh is playing against decks you've never seen before. That still happens to me these days when I play against super rogue decks in some Master Duel festival or whatever, and half of chat is backseating like crazy and I don't know what's going on because every card has so much text. To me, it's really annoying. It's really frustrating. That, like, I think would not be the case in a tier 0 format, right? You would just learn one deck to start with and then you would be okay to go. At the same time, there's other skill sets that you wouldn't be learning. Like, for example, deck building in a tier 0 format. It's important, and at a high level, it's really relevant, but at a beginner level, you're just going to be like, hey, this is your list now, go with that. And also just like preparing for different decks is also not something you would learn. I think it quite frankly just depends on, people are very different. It depends what frustrates people the most, right? If someone is easily frustrated by playing against decks that they haven't seen before, then it would probably be good letting them start playing Yu-Gi-Oh in like a less diverse format. I don't think I'm the best person to ask this, by the way, because I genuinely haven't tried learning Yu-Gi-Oh in over 20 years. So I'm like the one with the least amount of experience on how to learn Yu-Gi-Oh, right? It's been so long for me. So I can't even imagine sometimes how it feels for someone to enter the game like completely fresh. It's also too long ago for me. You're like 6 years old, Quantal. Calm down. Your birthday has a 2 in front of it, so you don't have a say here.